Hello, everyone. We are delighted to welcome you back to Module 2 of the 2021-22 academic year of the Michigan Sports Law Academy. We've had over 200 people sign up for tonight's session, and I can't wait to hear what our amazing panelists have to say. My name is Maria Patsalos, and I'm a partner at Michigan. I specialize in immigration, and I'm also in the sports group. So I help with all sports-related immigration queries, including work permits for footballers, and also assisting governing bodies with their sponsorship rules. Today's session has been marketed as an in-house counsel forum. But what does this mean exactly? Well, there are two main goals for today's session. First, our esteemed panel, who I will introduce shortly, will be sharing their career stories and providing practical tips and advice for those looking to pursue an alternative career in sports law. And secondly, the panel will be providing some insights into how to make the most of our internal and external legal advisors. So for today's session, we welcome three great panelists. First up, we have Dorianne Spiteri, who's the Chief Legal Officer at Socios.com. We're also joined by Andrew Cooke, who's the General Counsel at Fnatic. And finally, we welcome Natalie St Cyr Clarke, who's Special Counsel for the Sports Integrity Genius Sports. So let's start off with hearing from each of our panelists to firstly explain their background and how they became a lawyer. So who's going to kick off? Let's go with Dorian.
It's a pleasure to be invited on this panel tonight. I'd like to welcome everybody. So I've been practicing law for the past 11 years, and I've been working as an in-house for the past 9 years. I started my legal practice with a local prestigious law firm, and I was mainly focusing on litigation and commercial matters. However, the decision to join Socios Angeles was that it's not any ordinary IT company. In reality, it had a very innovative and exciting project of offering a product based on blockchain technology, a fan engagement platform for the sports and entertainment industry.
Natalie, over to you next.
I've been, a practicing lawyer now for the past 8.5 years. And my career has solely been in sport. Luckily, FIBA had a post available that was, it had a more governance focus. And so that meant that I was tasked with doing everything. From commercial contracts to governance to other regulatory matters. And I was fortunate enough to also be appointed as the company secretary for the Basketball Champions League.
Like Dorian, I also began my career in the legal department of law firms, i.e. in litigation. I qualified there in Norton Rose and was on my way for a less than glittering career in the world of fraud and white collar crime. Germany, and as the music industry reconfigured itself around the world of streaming, that promoter started to move into sports, and so therefore my portfolio extended to include some quite substantial sport events. So as General Counsel of Fashion Entertainment for nearly a decade, I oversaw our investment in the UFC. I delivered 2 FIFA Club World Cups. I delivered the AFC Asian Cup, multiple world championships of jiu-jitsu, as I said, multiple UFC pay-per-view and fight night events, plus very many other sports events, delivering sports events to a total of 8.5 million people during the time that I was there.
I mean, really interesting from all three of you. And I'm really loving kind of the journey that you've all taken into where you are now, really varied and different. I'd like now just to talk a little bit about the transition, because you all started off in private practice and then you moved into these sports roles later on. So can you tell me about how you found the transition from private practice into where your current roles, the positives, the negatives, how you found that generally?
In my case, I think the transition was a very positive one, in the sense that I relish the idea of being part of a wider purpose. So obviously working in a law firm, your sole purpose is to give legal services, whereas the purpose of this International Basketball Federation was to put on competitions and to protect young players and develop the game from grassroots to the professional level. So being part of that meant that I had to adapt a lot to, the culture of the company and consider things other than just legal considerations. So I had to learn very quickly about politics of the federation and the sports ecosystem in general, but also the objectives of the company and serving, let's say, our clients, which were just other departments, but serving the clients in a way that was more pragmatic and practical for the needs of the organization, with objectives of developing basketball, essentially.
Actually, echoing what Andy said, although I was exposed to a lot of different legal work, but I was quite compartmentalized, a bit pigeonholed to an extent, working in a firm. So you're ordinarily assigned to one litigation team or maybe a commercial team, but you don't get the full view of the different range of legal services offered. And I was very much working with corporate clients, so I could see the different approach to any legal matters. Obviously, they will have more in-house knowledge of how to tackle an issue, because being part of the business, that is key.
Yeah.
And I decided to move to an in-house role specifically for that. I felt that I could open up to more areas of law and be more closer to the business, understanding the strategy, understanding what the company wants to achieve, what it's been through. It's a learning process. So obviously, even avoiding any mistakes maybe that happened in the past. And the in-house knowledge gained is obviously one of the best assets for the company moving forward for any similar situations that can arise. So the shift was challenging, but I would say overall very satisfying.
As Dorian said, positioning yourself as a Swiss knife rather than as a scalpel in those situations, you can bring all of the expertise that you want in a specific transaction. Ultimately, in environments like that, sometimes you just got to make it happen, right? I think secondly, as a litigator, you become used to selling, do something today to stop something happening, rather than the idea of do something today to advance something happening, and selling the value of that rather than the cost, right? So again, that also lends itself to a risk management transition, which very often, if you're landing, particularly as a first lawyer in a place, you are selling, let's do this now. So, you don't crash the car into a wall. And one of my principles has always been in team builds, I'm not here to fire silver bullets, by which I mean, I'm not interested in saving the day. I'm interested in the bad thing not happening, and let's invest to do that.
Excellent. A lot of good advice there. One thing that Natalie, you mentioned earlier was about this kind of tension between in-house lawyers and the rest of the company, who see the lawyers as, here comes the no brigade. So do you have any advice for any non-legal professionals on how to make the most of in-house counsel?
Definitely. I found that my work was most effective when I was involved at the earliest stage possible. For instance, in negotiating a contract or some deal, because quite often the commercial guys would negotiate something and then put it on our desk and say, okay, look at this, review this. No context.
Sign it off as well.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously, from my perspective is looking at some of the risks in the contract. Obviously, some of them we can let slide for the business objective, but if that's not explained, and if we don't fully understand what the business objective is, then the job of reviewing something is so much harder than it needs to be. So and also, if we are involved from the beginning in negotiations, then we can assist in those things. We can provide advice as to how you should approach the situation, or let you know the limits of what we're able to do, and then it's easier for you to kind of draw red lines. So that's probably the best thing I would say. Involve in-house lawyers in things from the beginning, because obviously if we say no at a later stage and you've already agreed a deal with someone, then you might have some egg in your face when you go back to a sponsor and say, actually, we can't do this.
My views are pretty much aligned to the extent that I think the general perception by in-house departments besides legal is that the legal tend to be deal blockers. So actually they might be dreading the moment they have to run it past legal, fearing that will either delay the process or will stop and call off the deal completely. In reality, that is exactly the opposite. We have very much yes, we can, let's do this attitude, obviously within the legal parameters. I work within the blockchain industry, so being faced with a very fragmented regulatory framework, it is also very challenging. So what has worked in one particular situation with one particular partner might not be applicable for a different, although very similar deal. As Natalie mentioned, I think fostering that good relationship with colleagues is key, because the moment you gain people's trust within the company, I think it's a matter of them understanding your concerns. You highlight risks in reality, not because you want to block any deals, but you just want to make sure that the company does not encounter any issues or legal disputes down the line.
I would take a slightly contrarian view on this, actually, which is, I think lawyers are very, very needy, and they confuse. I've just written an article for the Law Society for this effect, which I wanted to call "Why FaceTime was bullshit," but they wouldn't allow me to do it. But fundamentally, we confuse what we think is good service for what the client thinks is good service, which is driven by bad practices that come from, again, sorry to name it, and it's not misconduct, I'm sure, but private practice, where you confuse what a premium service is and what your value proposition is. Your value proposition is not spending time with law firms, right? Or indeed, sorry, pardon me, as a law firm spending time with your clients. Your value proposition is providing solutions efficiently, right? And again, I think one of the things that is different about the in-house delivery context is I'm in the business of providing very efficient solutions, because we look at this through the lens of B2C service delivery. Most of my customers, and we distinguish here between customers and the client, most of my customers want legal services the same way they get every other service in their life. And this is true, this is a trend within B2B. All the things that make people buy something from ASOS or from Deliveroo or Just Eat or wherever are the same things that are increasingly driving the purchase of services. So you want something which is convenient, you want it on your terms, you want it with very little personal interaction, you want it in a way which is frictionless, ideally in a way that just completely integrates with the way in which you live your life. And that is my view as to how services should be delivered by in-house teams. It should not be a matter of FaceTime. It should not be a matter of heavy duty legal engagement, because that's the way that legal wants it. I think it should be frictionless.
Dorian, you mentioned just a second ago about considerations when looking at external counsel. So can you just give us a flavour of what are the key considerations that you look at when deciding to instruct external counsel?
I think the most important factor taken into consideration is the experience of the relevant external legal counsel in our space, in the blockchain space. Obviously, sports is also a relevant industry, but really and truly, the main focus is the crypto space, the fintech legal side. So when we do reach out to external legal advisors, we need to understand the knowledge and the experience, which oftentimes is quite limited, given that this is a relatively new area of law. Some jurisdictions don't even provide for any regulatory framework, but at least assessing the knowledge on DLT assets, on distributed ledger technology as a basic, obviously that would help the lawyer to better understand what we do. Efficiency is definitely key, having clear deliverables. So I am very structured in my own way of working. So I would want to understand a timeline for the deliverables, what will be covered, how they can assist us in the longer term. Obviously, we do reach out to external legal advisors for specific matters, but we tend to foster a good relationship, working relationship with the external legal, and we do feel that they are, to an extent, an extension of our in-house legal. Being present in so many different markets, it's impossible to recruit in-house in every market. So when the lawyers take an interest in what we do in our business proposition, so they understand what we are doing and what we would like to achieve, obviously that makes it easier for us to trust the external legal, not just on one matter, but having ongoing legal support. So we look more for the medium long-term business relationship with the external counsels. Obviously, efficiency is key because of the fast-paced environment that blockchain is. But I think those are the two main important characteristics when engaging external advisors.
We've got one question here, which I think flows nicely from what we've just been discussing. So I'll ask it now. And it's from Romilly. And they say, what's the relationship between in-house lawyers and external lawyers advising on the same matter? So are there certain legal issues delegated to the in-house team and others to the external lawyers to advise the business on? Or how does that work? Who wants to take that one first?
I think with me, it was more of a collaboration. We were the primary point of contact, obviously, internally. So the in-house lawyers were there to kind of ensure that the legal advice given was in line with the overall strategy of the company. But at the same time, yes, there were one or two issues that I was not qualified to deal with, like corporate Swiss law, that was exclusively delegated to the external lawyers. I was the internal liaison in the sense that, for instance, when we were registering for Basketball Champions League, new directors of the board, it was my responsibility to ensure that the requirements in accordance with the regulations, so the sporting regulations and statutes, were complied with, and then the external lawyers' responsibility to ensure that, for instance, the election was in accordance with Swiss law, and we did everything in accordance with the code of obligations and that kind of thing. So it really depends, but it most effectively works when obviously there's collaboration and some kind of synergy that way.
We have run out of time, sadly. I know there's more questions. We could go on all night, but I'm sure everyone's hungry. It's dinner time. So I just want to say thank you so much to our fantastic panelists. We've had some really insightful input. So thank you again. Thank you to all of you for joining us for this second module of the Sports Law Academy. I'm really pleased to announce that our next module is likely to be on Monday, the 28th of February. And the topic is going to be racism in sport. Are we doing enough? And it's going to be in partnership with Women in Football, which is fantastic. And we're going to be joined by industry experts such as Sanjay Bhandari, who we all know is the chair of Kick It Out, Lungi Masibo, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Birmingham City, Michael Frost, who's a Managing Associate at Mishcons, and Joe Ansborough, who's a former Scottish International Professional Rugby Union player. The session is going to be hosted by our very own Berthia Green, who's a trainee at Mishcon. So see you all then and have a good evening. Thank you.